One question, two views. You decide.
How in the world was the Great Pyramid aligned so precisely to true north? I mean, get this. Its base is lined up with the cardinal points with an accuracy of less than 4 arc minutes. That is 1/15th of a single degree. It's a mind-boggling feat of engineering that has had researchers scratching their heads for centuries. So, the big question remains, how'd they do it? This whole question really boils down to two completely different ways of looking at it. The first view says, look, the astronomical and surveying methods we know they had back in the Old Kingdom are totally good enough to explain this precision. But the other side argues that when you really get into the nitty-gritty, the tools and methods we know about, they just don't cut it. This whole debate is probably one of the biggest dividing lines in all of pyramid research. Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 3 key arguments: the limits of just plain observation, the challenges of using their instruments over huge distances, and the tricky effects of the atmosphere itself. So, argument number 1. This is all about observation limits. Basically, could you even get the precision you need just by looking up at the sky with your own 2 eyes? This is the very first step of the whole process, so if you can't get this right, nothing else matters. And right out of the gate, we're at a crossroads. One side is absolutely convinced that yes, these methods are more than enough. The other side, they argue that these methods are fundamentally, inherently too imprecise to get the job done. So, if you're in the first camp, you see this as a process of just incredible diligence. You'd watch the sun or a star move across the sky, maybe marking where it rises and where it sets. Now, you don't just do it once. You take a whole bunch of readings over days, maybe even weeks, and that lets you average out any little mistakes. Then, you use some simple geometry, like finding the exact halfway point between those marks, and bam, you've got true north. The key here, the absolute secret sauce, is repetition. You do it over and over and over to make sure your line is perfect. But then View 2 steps in and says, hold on a minute. They argue that any observation you make with a naked eye has some built-in uncertainty, a little bit of wiggle room. And more importantly, every single step you take after that, marking a point, drawing a line, splitting an angle, it adds another tiny little error into the mix. This is what's known as error propagation. And while these mistakes might seem tiny on a small papyrus scroll, they become absolutely massive when you try to scale that up to the 230-meter base of the Great Pyramid. Okay, on to our second argument. This one's all about instruments and scale. We're moving from the sky down to the ground. How well do your surveying tools actually work when you have to maintain that insane accuracy across hundreds of meters? And you guessed it, another clear split. View 1 proponents believe that any errors coming from the tools could totally be controlled. Meanwhile, View 2 fires back that over the enormous base of the pyramid, those tiny errors would just pile on top of each other until it was a complete disaster. Now, what's really fascinating about View 1 is how much it emphasizes mastering simple tools. They're saying things like measuring rods and plumb bobs are actually incredibly effective if you just use them with enough care and skill. By doing your measurements again and again, you make sure everything is consistent. They also make a really important point. Keeping a line straight, which is all about angular precision, is a totally different challenge than just measuring how long it is. And they're convinced that ancient surveyors had that angular part down cold. View 2 sees a fundamental, deal-breaking problem here. Think about it. To draw a straight line that's 230 meters long, you have to chain your measurements together, right? You lay one measuring rod down, then the next, then the next. They argue that every single time you place a rod, a tiny, unavoidable error in the angle gets introduced. We're talking a fraction of a millimeter. But do that hundreds of times, and those tiny little drifts add up, causing your straight line to actually curve. They believe this cumulative deviation makes it flat out impossible to get the pyramid's alignment with just those tools. All right, this brings us to our third and final argument, atmospheric effects. This is all about how the real world, the environment itself, interferes with making these kinds of precise observations. It's the messy reality of the situation. And the pattern holds. View 1 looks at these environmental problems as, manageable annoyances that you can work around. View 2, on the other hand, sees them as the dominant source of error, a fundamental roadblock to the kind of precision we're talking about. So a huge concept here is something called atmospheric refraction. What is that? Well, to put it simply, it's the bending of light as it travels through our atmosphere. Because of this, a star isn't exactly where your eyes see it. And this effect changes constantly based on the temperature, the humidity, and where the star is in the sky. Okay, we can handle this. By repeating observations on different nights and averaging all the results, you can cancel out the random ups and downs. They also point out that Egypt's super clear and stable desert climate would have been a massive help. But View 2 has a powerful counterargument. They say things like refraction aren't random at all. They're systematic biases. They consistently push the apparent position of a star in a predictable direction. And without modern tools to correct for that, they argue it's an error you just can't average away. It's always there. So we've walked through the 3 core battlegrounds in this debate, and all of it brings us right back to that central, incredible mystery. How was the Great Pyramid aligned so precisely to true north? We've examined the problem through 3 different lenses: the limits of what the eye can see, the precision of their tools over vast distances, and the distorting effects of the atmosphere. And each perspective offers a complete, logical explanation from its own point of view. So now, we've laid out both sides of the coin, and as always, this channel doesn't take a position. That's not our job. The question is, what's your take? Were the known methods of the Old Kingdom, when applied with unbelievable skill and patience, actually enough to pull this off? Or does the pyramid's stunning precision point to some kind of lost technique, a capability we just don't understand yet? Let us know what you think down in the comments. And hey, if there's another big question you want us to tackle next, let us know that too.